an interesting thing for me is like very few people, at least in our generation, I don't know, like the NYU students here can correct me about the kids these days, but like majored in data. Like I don't know anyone who like majored in data. There's like stats or like physics or these adjacencies. So I'm always interested to hear how people like got into this racket. How did you get into data? What was your path to where you are now?
I think the degree you're looking for is math.
That's probably right.
I was a math major.
Okay, here we go.
So you've met someone who majored in data. But no, I started my career, college, I thought I was going to be an engineer. As it turned out, I think I liked the math a lot more than I liked the building. I liked customer, computer science. First job was at Wayfair, which is sort of like one full tech stack ago. I think just, if I'd been born 2 years later, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have on-prem hardware. But, I don't know. I sort of lord that over the team who's like a little younger than me. I'm like, you don't know what it was like. We used to drive down to Waltham and unplug servers. But it's been fun. I think mostly like a lot of things that were challenges at the time, things like data silos. It's like, I haven't heard about a data silo in a while. You just like toss Frank Slootman a little more money and put it all in Snowflake. There are no data silos. So started at Wayfair, sort of self-taught some data science along the way, and then moved to Drizzly. So I know quite a bit about alcohol law, time zone law, and how those two things relate.
Time zone law? There's laws around time zones?
Yeah, so everyone on the data team knows I'm inordinately a stickler about when people get EST, EDT wrong. Just say ET. It's like if you don't know, just say ET. But Arizona does not observe daylight saving except for Navajo Nation, which does, which you need to know if you're really in tune to sort of the alcohol delivery laws of all of these places, because you need to make sure that if there's a cutoff for alcohol, you're respecting it.
I hope that knowledge is never useful for you again.
the only...
I'm trying to imagine a scenario where that's like important to know, and I can't imagine a good scenario.
There's a West Wing episode about it where they get stuck on a train in Indiana, and Time in Indiana actually has its own Wikipedia article. But I think most of this is sort of like I've worked in two businesses that are sort of like low margin, last mile delivery, like trying to make money on, I don't know, TV stands, trying to make money delivering Bud Light. And my loose advice is like, if you have the opportunity to do that or move money on the internet, I would move money on the internet.
That's good. Okay, so you're here. And one thing I think about when I think about Ramp, it's a company I kind of look up to and hope we can kind of approximate at our best moments of a company that's shipping product fast and really well. How does a data team like support that? Like it seems like you guys are a big part of that, and I'd love to hear more about like how you're organized, how you're focused on that. Like what does that look like at Ramp?
So it's definitely changed, and I think something to be I think super transparent about is Ramp was a $8 billion company with a 4-person data team before I got here. They had a ton of success with a 0-person
GMV
revenue. Not revenue, valuation.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. And so a lot of what we did was really built around having an extremely strong stance as to what we needed to build. And what we needed to build was largely feature parity with a lot of competitors under one hood, with a very, very high bar for product and a very, very high focus on saving money and time for our customers. And that was really, really successful. And it was frankly really, really successful before we had, a very big data team. We are starting to get now to the point where I think things change a little bit. And so the first is we're kind of running out of feature parity to build with competitors. The other is we now have a wealth of data and a distribution moat that lets us build things no one else can. And so one example of this is when we built our travel product, this is an area where we said, hey, like we need a data person on this on the first day. Because when we launch this, we need to have a sense of what market rates look like for travel. We do not want to launch this product without a concept of market rates, because we need to show that we are the experts in what travel costs. And so I think increasingly embedding data people into products faster and earlier is going to be how we kind of hit the next stage, where we're building things where we don't necessarily know exactly what we need to build.
That's super interesting. So why, like, you can imagine the kind of counter argument though of like, it was a successful company when it had a tiny data team. Like, why have a data team? Like, maybe unpack that just a little bit more.
Yeah, and so I think one example that I think is sort of helpful for me is I'll talk about a product launch that we had at a point in time, and it was international reimbursements. When we built this, we built international reimbursements because we really wanted to close Shopify, and we really wanted to close other businesses that were, had international components. When we built it, we kind of knew what it looked like because other competitors have it. It's hard to build. You need to know a lot about finance rails. Kind of easy to know when you're done. And there is absolutely no reason to A/B test this. There's no counterfactual world where you're like, I wonder what ramp is like without international reimbursements. It doesn't make sense to deprive half of your customers and run like a really clean control and see who churns. You just roll it out. As we think about the things we're starting to build, which are like travel, like I told you, price intelligence, procurement, if you had 100 really, really smart and talented PMs, they could build these products 100 different ways. We don't really know what done looks like. We're not going to be done. And I think sort of the importance of compounding these 1% improvements, I don't want to say this in a way that sort of like celebrates incrementalism. I don't think we're taking a lot of 1% bets at Ramp, but having a data team that can kind of come in and say, our product velocity is not just launching the thing, it is celebrating those 1% compounding improvements and being that feedback wheel, I think is increasingly important as you're sort of at the scale that we are and starting to get the data points and observations that we're starting to get.
That's super interesting. So attention I often feel in product and building product is like the difference between being highly data driven and being like driven with your gut. And what I'm hearing from you is like a little bit of both, which is like there's like a thing we have to build. And it's not like the early era of the company sounds like it was just like high conviction bets. So like we just have to go build this thing. But do you see a tension with that? Or like how would you describe Ramp's product culture like between people who are highly data driven and like the decisions they're making and like these A/B tests and optimizations and sort of like that pattern versus like we just have to build this thing and this looks great?
So this is I think like this will be the sort of spiciest take I have, which is use a data science model or an A/B test as an absolute last resort. Like so much of data science, you can get like 80% of the way there almost all the time with like a 6-line case statement. Yeah. And I think also too, like
don't tell anyone. We need job security here.
On releases, I'd sort of say like I think and we talk about this a lot on marketing. I think the phrase like measure everything is actually really lazy. And the reason why I say that is it is not trivial to measure things. It slows things down. And I've been at orgs where they say, we want to keep some part of the product exactly like it was a quarter ago. And you're like, why is that? They're like, we really want to have a sense of how much better our product has gotten. And I think for us, we would never consider doing something like that because we don't really think about A/B testing or experimental design as a scoreboard. It's not something we optimize for. We do not really make a lot of product decisions based around like, hey, we want to move this number 2%. We would really invoke experimental design, A/B testing, sort of paying that cost in situations where you really cannot know what to do without the results of this test. And so I think an example of this would be something like a very large brand campaign. You really need to be structured ahead of time because you know what decision you're trying to make. You say, we're going to get the results of this, we're going to look at the coefficient, and we're going to make a decision about what our budget looks like next quarter. That's a really different scenario than that international reimbursements example I gave you, where it's like, we know it's going to be better. No one really cares how much better it's going to be. We're never going to imagine a ramp without international reimbursements again. Let's roll this out and like put our engineers on something else.
That makes a ton of sense. I think this segues into a thing I ask everyone, mostly because I'm looking for a good answer where I don't know that it actually exists or can exist, and you might quibble with the question, which is like, how do you think about the ROI of the data team at Ramp? Do you even think about that? Is that even a reasonable question to ask? It's like a super common thing that comes up in data circles, and I'm curious, like, is that even like a question you get here?
It is not, which is a luxury. It's a hard question to answer, but I'll talk a little bit about sort of like why that is and what our approach is, and I think a lot of it is really been a luxury for me. Most data teams that I've been at, if you have sort of like 3 people on the data team, you stretch them across all of the surface areas. If you have 5 people, you stretch them across all of the surface areas. The way that we build here is very different. I think we say pretty consistently, what is the number one area that we really need to be world class on 6 months from now that we are not today? Let's invest heavily in that and ignore everything else for the time being. The first 3 data scientists we hired at Ramp were all on the risk team. And if you think about why, we needed to be world class at risk, frankly, before we needed to have a world class product. We, I think, are still not great at spending money on Facebook relative to how I would like to be. But our product is where we invested, our risk is where we invested. And so I think picking those areas and embedding people deeply, that's sort of like what we've tried to do. And I think that's kind of like why we don't necessarily have to answer questions about ROI as a service org.
And just going a little bit deeper on that, like, is that just because the people you're working with, or you're like attaching to these high priority problems, and it's just like obvious to people that you guys are helping, or is it like the people who are like developing the risk stuff? I don't know what you do when you develop a risk thing, but like that they're just like singing your praises. Like, what is that? It's just like for people here who are like leading data teams or on data teams, I'm always interested in like what's the kind of portable lesson here of like, if people get that question or if they're trying to like think about that, like what's like the specific thing you guys think you do well? I mean, the focus of that is very admirable, and so maybe that's part of it. But are there other things that you think lead to that just sort of like almost like obviousness that you guys are high ROI, high NPV?
So in an odd way, I would say we test people on the way in for their data skills, and once you're here, we really just say, go figure out a way to have impact. And I'll sort of like give one example of this. We brought someone on a while ago, and their first project was on sort of internal tools, CX. The first thing we did is they had to get data out of these 2 tools that don't have 5-train connectors. So the first couple of days or weeks.
What do you even do?
Yeah, exactly. And this was also like
back in the old days, we used to write scripts.
This was like right before we had the ChatGPT Enterprise version 2, so like I think they were still going to Stack Overflow for some of this stuff, which RIP.
Wow. Remember that? Remember all the way back 2 years ago?
Barely. But yeah, so the first part of this person's job is like data engineering. The next part's bread and butter, analytics engineering, dim fact tables, showing stuff in Looker. And the reason we were doing this is we really needed to understand what we wanted to staff our CX team to be next year, which meant we needed to think about sourcing for CX now. And that means you really have to think about, what does our growth look like? What does our incident rate look like? What does our deflection rate look like? How does our scenario planning look like? Which is a super different part of the brain than kind of like the part reading DAGs and writing Airflow in Python. But all of this together is impact. And I think we really believe that there's not much at Ramp where you can kind of like parachute in for 2 weeks, understand everything about accounting, build a classifier model, and leave. And so for us, it takes a long time to get up to speed, and the only way people are effective is that they can kind of like create that cross-functional influence. And so I think for us, not that we don't estimate sort of the ROI of a data team specifically, we look at a team as a whole, and I think influence and impact is kind of an expectation of everyone, not just sort of like doing data things with your head down.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that I think the real, I've said this a few times, but I think the real like version of data team ROI is like it's net promoter score of your partners. It's like if they feel that impact, that's the real measure. It's like
and we get to measure that, which is nice.
Yeah, that's right. It's juice the stats. So this is a good segue. There's an old saying: first-time founders care about product, second-time founders care about distribution. As a first-time founder, I'm caring more and more about distribution. So maybe I'm going through that journey, but. That's something I've heard you say in the past in the context of data teams, and maybe it's related to what we were just talking about. Like, tell me how you think about that.
Yeah, so I think like I'm sure many people in this room, I think like I have had really specific pieces of feedback, especially like critical feedback and performance reviews, and like those are the ones where I'm like I'll be able to write them, word for word. And I think a lot of them have sort of been around how do you elevate your influence. And I think this is probably true of me, and I think it's probably true of almost every single person in this room. We're going to be more career gapped and constraint based on our ability to influence more so than technical ability. And I think that's increasingly true in sort of like the AI world where the technical ability comes a little faster. The probably like number one thing I hear from our head of product is he's like, I want your team to tell my team what to do more. And I think all of us have probably worked on something in a notebook that is perfect and it is cool
All
and
the time.
like
Yeah.
it is so incredible, and then you like look at the metadata on it and you're like, huh. No one looked at this. No one has made a decision on this. And so I think for us basically just saying like, hey, if you have built something, I'm sure you've spent 4 hours, 4 days, 2 weeks on it. Spend the time to think about how can I distribute this? How can I think about what company initiatives, what senior leaders care about? How can I attach this work to something that will move a needle they care about? And how can I make sure that the decision is being made based on the results of my work? And I think that's like a lot of what we've been trying to push with the team.
I love that. And everyone always looks at the notebooks I make, but you know.
Must be nice.
Yes. Because I'm the CEO, they have to. Otherwise, they don't have a job. Okay, you talked about AI. The big question on my mind is AI in data, is it going to take our jobs and why?
So it's
Just yes or no question, Ian. Just
AI will not take our jobs,
okay, good. Whew.
thankfully. I think might take a few jobs. I think oftentimes, people are kind of like, why can't we do self-service? Why can't we do self-service? Why can't we do self-service? And for me, it's sort of like the concept of induced demand, which from traffic planning is you're like, there's so much traffic. Let's build another lane. Let's build another lane. Let's build another lane. And all of a sudden, more cars drive on it. That's what I've really always seen, right? Is you're like, there will always be questions because as you make it easier to answer questions, the cost of asking questions goes down. And as people are able to self-serve more complex questions, the remaining questions that make it to you are the more complex questions. I think that will continue with AI. I think it'll accelerate with AI. I think we will end up spending people time on answering more complex questions, where I think you've sort of seen this through technology over the last 20 years. I think it will continue to kind of be like a extremely great time to be a 99th percentile in the data space. You will have more operating leverage than ever, and I think it'll be a worse time to be a 50th percentile, anything, which is great for me because Ramp's data team only has 99th percentile data professionals.
Wow, that's congratulations. That's great.
It's nice.
You said it does connect back to something you said earlier of like it's just kind of obvious, right, that the like just technical skill of like mastery of the pandas syntax is just going to matter a lot less than the people who can get in and like partner with the risk team or the international reimbursements team or whatever to really understand like what's important. How do you interview for that? Like, what do you like? It's easy to do the technical. I always find like the technical interviews are easy. It's like, okay, you can like objectively like, is the code good? But what do you look for in data people that you're looking to bring on that make them 99th percentile, other than like the mastery of how to, like step one is import TensorFlow stuff.
Yeah. So I think honestly the number one thing I look for is sort of curiosity and passion. And I think my job building a data team is to sort of push out the total universe of kind of everything we can do and accomplish. And if I am the high watermark on all things technical, like we are in a lot of trouble. Which really means that like I need to have people that are very, very passionate about things. We have a lot of those, and I think the people on the data team are passionate about different things. There are some people who are super opinionated about DevX, some people who are really opinionated about how to present data. And so finding something like that where you're like, look, I don't know if this person's going to be able to tell me everything about this, this, and this, but I am confident that after this person's been here, everyone will go to them to learn more about this, and they will be able to pick up any tool in this space, be excited about it, and teach everyone about it. If I feel like that after a call, I think that's probably the most important thing.
And that strikes me as a very durable skill set, even as like LLMs get better.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it described as kind of the difference between like just-in-case learning, where you're like, show me that you know pandas syntax without connecting to the internet, and like just-in-time learning, which is like, if you had 4 hours, what could you do? What could you figure out?
Love that. Cool. I've got a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up. I want to talk a little bit about, I've heard you talk in the past about how data systems tend toward production. And I don't know what that means. Tell me what it means.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back a little bit to, right when I started, I think the most wrong you could be as a data professional was you'd show some wrong numbers in a board deck. Or
that's very wrong. That's
it's
bad.
very
that's
wrong.
Bad wrong. As
very
someone
wrong.
who
definitely
every
bad.
corner has a board deck.
Don't advise it.
Yeah. Don't do that.
But if you sort of
our head of data is here, she knows better than to do that. But yeah, that's right.
if you sort of think about kind of like reverse ETL, operational warehouses, I think increasingly you are able to put, if you build something that's valuable for someone, they really say three things, which is they're like, I like this reporting. I want to operationalize it. I want it faster, and I want it somewhere else. And an example of this for us is like right when I got here, every 24 hours, we would report on who is delinquent. We'd sort of be like, here's who's delinquent. And then eventually we're like, one, why is it every 24 hours? And two, like we should shut cards off if people go delinquent.
That's what I would do.
You do this all the time. Yeah. We shut you down all the time and turn you back on.
You shut us down? Are we delinquent? Christ, I hope not. I gotta.
But then all of a sudden, right? You're like, well, it's switched a little, as opposed to sort of like, we need this number to be super right for the board meeting. We're like, we need this number to be right in perpetuity, at low latency, in an event-driven manner. And so I think it's just sort of the concept of the blast radius of a data team has gotten much larger in the last 5 years, which I think is super exciting. I think it lets us do a lot more.
Sounds great, yeah.
But you can get wrong a lot faster.
Speaking of blast radius of data team, tell me how, I'm going connecting the dots back to the AI topic, how data is like a really broad term, and like it's always kind of had this sort of dichotomy between like analytics and machine learning, and now with AI, I mean, it's like it depends on good data, but like people are building AI product that isn't necessarily like coming from the data team. And what's the relationship with that like at Ramp? Because you guys have built some shiny AI products. I see things with the like sparkle emoji, so that's how I know they're AI.
The shiniest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's how you know it's good. It's got the sparkle emoji.
I mean, I think probably this is pre AI, but we have a disgusting Salesforce instance, as many do in this audience, I'm sure.
That's right.
And we have a field that's like product loss reason. And you're like, we should just take the product loss reasons and feed them to ChatGPT and get it to summarize everything. And then you're like, well, I looked at this field and there's 180,000 values, of which 99.8% are null. And then like a bunch of them are just sort of like the word null typed. And you're like,
there's misspellings of that.
You're like, as it turns out, this is probably not like a summarization problem. Like there's only ever been like 100 properly entered values here. And so why I think this is valuable is I think like for things like NPS, it's been clear to data teams for a long time. If you want to generate numbers, you have to be really precise about how you do that. And I think increasingly for data teams, you're going to have to be exceedingly precise about how you generate text and make sure that the data capture is sort of there, because I think the value of capturing, high caliber text is probably higher than it's ever been. And I think it's sort of on us to do that work ahead of time such that we can leverage large language models after the fact.
And that's like a very upstream problem. That's like, for that specific example, it's like you need to go lecture the sales team on like CRM hygiene, which is something I've tried to do in the past to mix success. I mean, like, is that like literally the task at hand if you want to go do that project?
I think it is. And I think for so much of this stuff is figuring out like, hey, what is the process that we actually need to generate this? And, obviously, right? Think about everyone who wants their question asked. Like the brand person's like, all right, I want to know brand. Let's ask everyone, how'd you hear about Ramp? Some PM's like, I want to know about this. Ask them how they think about this. It's like you could quickly get to like 25 questions that you'd want to ask on an intro sales call. And so then I think it's like, all right, how do we make sure we're thinking about like what are the highest leverage questions to ask where we actually don't know the answer, where we will make decisions as a result, probably take it down to 3 and like ask the sales team nicely, please ask these 3 questions and kind of keep track of it over time.
That always works.
Always.
Yeah, go ask people nicely to fill out fields accurately. Cool. Well, I had a bunch of lightning round questions written down on my phone, and it can't connect to the internet, so I don't know what they are. And I wrote them long enough ago that I've forgotten them. So
try ramp1 underscore. Sorry.
I'm not going to make everyone watch me try to connect to Wi-Fi right now. That'll be embarrassing. So I'm going to turn it over to audience questions. Who's got something for Ian? Oh, way in the back, really? No, get the mic because I don't know.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
It has seemed in my experience that onboarding to data teams takes a lot longer than most other roles because you can't really make an impact until you have a lot of experience with like the entire kind of stack. As you've become managing a larger team, is there anything that you've changed your mind about recently about how to?
Yes, there is an area where I've changed my mind. And I think previously I would have said, let's try to put a data professional in the highest leverage spot for them over the next 6 months. And now I think I would add like 1 comma to that phrase, which is like where they have a really talented product manager, engineer, and designer around them to support them. And so a lot of what we do is I think, frankly, like still we're a pretty small data team relative to the company.
How big is the data team?
I think we are now about 30.
How big is the company?
About 1,000.
Okay.
And so what it often means is we are sometimes dropping people into product pods that have never had a data person. And that can be kind of challenging, right? Because you're like, someone tell me about how all these accounting tables work. And we're like, no one knows. We've never done any reporting on this. And so finding, I think, basically saying like, hey, you don't need to know how Salesforce works. You don't need to know how this works. You don't need to know how this works. I just want you to sit with this team and think about what problems they're having. Ask the backend engineers questions. Sit next to them. Talk to the PMs. Talk to the designers. And we are going to really, really, really tighten your scope. I want you to answer a ton of questions. I want you to drive this product forward for a couple of months. And then when you feel really good here, let's pick your head up and we can figure out what to do next. So I'd say like tighten the scope and find someone next to you on both sides who's really excited to work with you.
I wish that was my onboarding when I joined a team back in the day. That sounds great. Cool. Other questions?
So I have a question on your spicy take on experimentation versus, say this like more so product intuition or instinct-based type of decisioning when it comes, just like when it comes to like making decisions. Do you feel like that's kind of due to the fact that Ramp is B2B? Like since you mentioned that you started your career at Wayfair, so I assume like I'm just kind of curious about like how you would compare like preferences in that regard within the context of like B2B versus B2C product.
Yeah, I do think so. I think also a lot of the business model matters quite a bit. And like you think about a company like Uber, right? It's like hyper local markets, supply and demand. You really need to have a sense of elasticity everywhere at every single point in time. You cannot imagine that being successful without a world-class data team. And the value of a 1% improvement at every single stage in the life cycle mattered tremendously. There are areas like that for us. I would say risk is absolutely that. I think increasingly growth is getting there. So much of what we're doing in our core product though right now, I think we're just so far away from what we want. And I don't say that like we have a bad product. We have a tremendous product, but I think we are very ambitious and I think still have like a bit of a clear vision as to where we need to go. And so I just don't think there's many stops along the way right now in our core product where we are blocked because we do not know the results of an A/B test.
And that is just much more common to be the case at a consumer company. Is that just because of the scale, like the number of users? Is it because of like how? I think you were kind of there's like an effervescence to it a little bit of like the people are easy come, easy go. Like, was that a big difference from like how you did things at Drizzly as an example?
Yeah, I think another one is sort of like what you are optimizing for and the proxy of what you are measuring are relatively close. And what I mean by that is you never know LTV, but you might know 30-day revenue. And 30-day revenue is actually like a pretty good proxy for LTV. So you can say, we're going to do this. It's going to be on 1 million customers, and we're going to have a pretty good sense of 30-day LTV, and it's going to take us 30 days to arrive at this metric after the test. Won't take forever. For us, not to give away like any of our metrics, no one ever churns. I have no idea what causes people to churn because we have like so few instances of churn. You can't really build a data science model on churn. And so we don't really have that discrete object like a checkout flow where you can say this is obviously better. What we want to have is a really, really joyous experience. And so you're like, well, what's a proxy for a really good joyous experience? And I don't think there's as clear of a proxy for this as there is as sort of like a checkout flow for e-commerce.
Cool. Who else?
Hey, so you mentioned how it's possible how AI can possibly take over some of those kind of like simpler data questions and allow data teams to answer some of the more complex questions. I'm curious, what role can you see product teams who are skilled in the data realm? What role can you see them of taking over some of those simpler data-oriented questions and leaving some of the more complex questions over to the data side? How kind of like important do you see that as like a requirement from product teams to be really skilled in the data world?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think when a team at Ramp is working extremely well, we don't really have a sense of why. And by that, I kind of mean sometimes we have like a data scientist and an analytics engineer on something. We kind of allocate work, and they just figure out how to break it down. We've had PMs and people on the data team that have been joined together on projects for over 2 years at Ramp, right? I'm like, I don't really know like who does what sometimes. Like they just click and they work. And we have PMs at Ramp who have been former data scientists. They're super talented. We have other people who are kind of more like, hey, like I want you to tell me what to do. I'm going to go work on other stuff. I'm like more design focused and more business focused. So I don't necessarily think there's like a one size fits all answer. I think mostly though, right, it's like we get to velocity with a pace of iteration. I want data professionals at Ramp talking to their counterparts sometimes like once an hour, like once every 15 minutes. Like I want the feedback loop to be very tight. I think if a PM is like capable of self-serving, the feedback loop can be even tighter, right? Because it's just sort of in their own head. And so loosely, I'd say like the ability to self-serve, whether it's data, whether it's finance, whether it's design, whether it's being able to read back-end code, I think just being able to increase feedback loops for yourself without depending on other people is going to be super high leverage. I think AI probably is going to be able to help that out.
So you don't see that as like because AI, that's just more of a general philosophy on like the types of things you want people to be able to self-serve versus where you want data teams spending their time?
Yeah.
Cool. Other questions?
If you had a time machine and you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice when you started this job, what would it be?
I think the most helpful piece of feedback I've gotten is to put people on fewer things. And I sort of know about myself that like I am more extroverted and I care what people think and I want to make like a whole bunch of relationships with the org. And every single time we've had to be more precise and say, actually, we're going to cut scope. We're going to focus someone deeper. You kind of like write up a Slack message and you like edit it and edit it and edit it and edit it. And you like feel a little sick to your stomach and then you hit send. And then you just sort of get like 4 thumbs up Slack emojis. And then people are like, sounds good. And the person who you're like, hey, we're not going to prioritize this work. They're like, awesome, thanks. This makes sense. Let me know like when you can get it. And you're like, oh my God, that was like so easy. I should have done that like 3 months ago. But I talk about this with the team a lot, which is like, if you are helpful, it's a good thing. If you are helpful, people will ask you more questions. Oddly, if you are helpful, it means you will need to spend more of your day saying no to people and kind of being really eloquent about what the most important thing you need to do is and being better at saying no to everything else because you're going to get more stuff that comes onto your plate. And so I think both for me, I think some of like the first time managers on my team, just pushing people to kind of say no to more things and be very precise. I think being very precise in public about what you're working on and what you're not is really often like a great sign of seniority. It shows that you know what's important and that you're working on. And so I'd say like restricting the focus even tighter and putting people on the highest leverage thing, thus like proving that me and my team know the highest leverage thing.
Who do you report to?
I don't know.
It's taking an oddly long time to answer that question.
No,
Who gives you money? Who tells you your money?
That's
right. Well, no one has to approve. It's ramp, so it's all free.
I also know how to delete my own fraud, which is great because we're gonna go to K-Town with Barry's team after, and so like anything on 32nd Street is automatically deleted, which is nice.
Is that true for all ramp customers or just you?
Yeah, Ben has that tonight too.
Okay, good. That's good.
I report to the VP of Engineering, Nick, and I think like some of the most helpful feedback he gives me is he runs a 200-person org, and something he told me once is like, look, like I can't fix vibes, but what I can do is if you tell me where you want me to hold someone accountable and write that down, I can help hold that person accountable. And so I think that's been like a really, really helpful thing for me to think about reporting to Nick. And he's been super helpful on blocking our team and making sure that we can move as fast as possible.
So I have a couple, I'm going to selfishly throw in a couple more questions here because this is something I've been thinking about a lot. So you report into engineering, and we just talked a bunch earlier about how you partner with engineering and product teams, so that kind of makes sense. But that's also like just one part of the product. You guys have, as you were alluding to earlier, stuff going on with sales. Why do you report into engineering specifically?
So the way that Ramp is organized is we believe really strongly in small cross-functional product engineering data design pods. We have mostly been a product development team. And I think that does go back a little bit to sort of thinking about how we work, how we prioritize. Risk also reports into engineering because that's like a very engineering heavy job. And so I'd say, again, right, it's like, not that we want to, not that I would say that we're like mediocre at anything for finance or mediocre for anything sales, but our initial investments, we said, we want to put people on the highest leverage thing. And for us, it was risk to start. Then it was really building out our core product. And we now, I think, kind of have 3 years of sort of supporting engineering product data design and closer to sort of like only 1 year, 6 months on other parts of sort of the sales and marketing org.
So how does that work then? I have a very it's almost like a boring, or a little bit like like in the weeds question on this, but it's I don't know, it's interesting. Like at least it is to me. Hope it is for you guys. I'm up here, so it doesn't matter if it is. I get to ask it, But like if like the sales team or the finance team needs support, or the marketing team needs support on something, you're saying measuring the efficacy of a brand campaign, like how do they get you to prioritize their stuff? Like you report in engineering, like the very like simplistic view of the way an organization works is like your boss will be like, hey, I want you to do the engineering stuff because I'm the engineering guy, right?
So our CTO took over marketing.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is, which is when you think about kind of like what has worked really well for us, I think it really is that belief that holding small groups of people very accountable and prioritizing bottoms up works really well. It definitely works for a core product. It works for risk. There's no reason why it doesn't work for other parts of the org as well. And so, frankly, I think we've sort of been just trying to incept more and more teams and sort of say like, you work in finance? Guess what? You're actually an engineering team now. Engineering/finance, engineering/brand marketing. So we're all engineering teams now.
I'm sure those teams love that.
They do.
Do they get engineering comp?
Yes.
That's great. They tack AI onto the front. They get into the next band.
That's the goal.
Further. Yeah, that's right. Cool. Well, we have time for a couple more, maybe.
Hey there. So you have talked a lot about deploying your team's resources really tightly into various verticals within your organization. How do you think about, or how do you like, where do you find the most value in leveraging the centralization of your team? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, so I really have kind of like two mandates for the team. The first is very high degrees of impact on that small cross-functional product engineering data design team. And then the other is I want everyone on the data team to make the data team better. And that is a high bar because we have a lot of people who are super passionate about things. But I think kind of like, to be totally honest, I don't really care about like selling furniture. I didn't really care about selling alcohol. I love fintech. I don't really care about credit card fraud. I love being on a data team. And like that is what I'm curious about. That's what I'm passionate about. And having people on my team who can teach me something is fascinating. I sort of said this earlier. If I'm the high watermark on all things technical, our team is in a ton of trouble. And so I need to have people who are learning constantly. And I think one of my favorite parts of the team is like we have a meeting every other week. 2 people present at it. They learn something. They talk about it. The osmosis that we have on our team is extremely high. A question that Barry had on his list that I fed him that he didn't ask me was about vendors. We have really, we consistently have like junior people on our team evaluate vendors. And that's really important to me because first is I think everyone on my team would quit if we had to use like Oracle tomorrow. Right? It's like, I would quit.
there any Oracle people here?
Yeah.
Shout out to Oracle.
But the world's moving like super fast. It's been moving super fast ever since I've been in data. It's only been moving faster, and we need to try these tools out. We don't know which ones are going to work. We're spending a lot of time paying attention to this stuff, and if I can have someone on my team who's really passionate about something, who wants to roll it out, who wants to tell the team about it, that's really high leverage. I think people leave jobs if they feel like they're not learning as fast as they could be somewhere else. A really big part of my job is making sure that my team's learning. It cannot all come from me. I need to create an environment where my team can be learning stuff constantly and teaching people stuff constantly. And so I think that's sort of the biggest area of centralization for me. And I think it's frankly kind of like what makes me most excited to come to work on the day.
That's awesome.
It is awesome.
That is great.
You can come to the next one.
One more time for one more question. First hand I see pop up. Oh, there it is.
Big fan of the reports your team puts together aggregating spend data. Can you talk more about what drives that? What do you decide to report on? Tell us more.
Yes. This is probably the area that I think I'm most passionate about right now and where I'm going to spend a lot of time. A lot of what we did at the start was internal facing, where we said, we are going to leverage ramp data to improve ramp. We are now at the scale where we can really build things on our data. We can see things like Hex is picking up a lot of market share. Shout out Hex. But you know, something our CTO, our CEO talked about is he's like, there's the old phrase like, you don't get fired for buying IBM, but maybe you should be fired for buying IBM. I think at Ramp you definitely would be fired for buying IBM. And so I want it to be impossible for you to evaluate a vendor without coming to Ramp first to learn everything about it. And it's not just price, which is sort of like, am I getting a good deal? And I'll just, to throw another BI tool under the bus, I'm like, Domo. I think it's a legacy tool. I wouldn't recommend it. The question's not, are you getting a good price on Domo, right? It's like, should I be buying this tool at all? And then for other things, you're like, do I have the right amount of seats? Guess what? We can work to see Okta logins and say, are you actually using the tool that you're paying for? Because maybe it's the right tool, maybe it's a good price, but maybe you're using the wrong seats. And so being able to buy extremely well, being able, and I'll just give you another example. For travel, the first product we built for travel, we talked to a bunch of companies. We said, give us your travel policies. We got all their travel policies. We built a travel product that takes in the major themes. Eventually, we talked to companies that are like, just tell me what my travel policy should be. Like, I don't have a travel policy. You're Ramp. Just tell me what my travel policy should be. My strategic, at my IPO, we will not be talking about how my travel policy like got us here, right? Just like take this off the plate. Let me do what's necessary and strategic. And so when we think about how to take Ramp's data, that's really kind of the vision. It's like, we will increasingly remove any decisions you need to make that are not strategic. We will increasingly arm you with data to make the best decision you can. We'll make you really good at buying. We'll make you really good at spending.
Well, that is a great note to end it on. I want to thank Ian for doing this with me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You agreed.
Thanks for coming to the office.
The Ramp for hosting us. This is a lovely space. We'll have to host more. I'm just going to host events that don't include you here. This is just great.
We have a big team.
Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. We'd love to see you at future events. We'd love ideas. If there's people you want us to go get and cajole into doing this with us, people you're curious to hear from, or if you think you're interesting enough, let me know. And look forward to hanging out and seeing you guys around. Thanks, everyone.